why I don't think there'll be a Labour landslide. For a start, in 1997, of course, John Major's majority had virtually disappeared between 92 and 97. He started with a majority of 21 in 1992. Boris Johnson had a majority of 80. Now, MPs will tell you that with boundary changes, the Tory majority is really 90. And I'm going to agree with Keir Starmer about something else. I do think they've got a mountain to climb.
Yeah, they do.
Because if the Tories really have got a majority of 90, then that's a much bigger task for Labour than 97.
I am now delighted to be joined by a brilliant superstar political punditry panel. In the studio, we have legendary veteran broadcaster from Sky News, Jon Craig, who was up all night on Thursday covering
in Blackpool,
covering every twist and turn. You have managed to have some sleep.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't get any sleep on Thursday night, obviously, but I did last night.
And you took the dog for a nice long walk.
When I got home, yeah.
Good. Also, welcome to the show, Anne McCelvoy, executive editor for Politico Europe, who hosts a brilliant podcast, the weekly Politico podcast Power Play. Anne, welcome. Have you had any sleep?
I have had sleep, actually, just at all the wrong times. I think I've done exactly what they tell you not to do to your circadian rhythms, and I hope they'll come back in the fullness of time.
We've all jet-lagged ourselves. And welcome the wonderful Steve Richards, author, broadcaster, podcaster, and the host of the brilliant Rock and Roll Politics. Steve, have you been glued to screens and your phone for the last 72 hours?
Yeah. I found it oddly compelling, even though I'd resolved at the beginning not to be drawn in. I like elections.
Yeah.
We all do.
We love an election. And all our listeners love an election. So many lovely, honestly, what I love about our listeners that we are all kind of proud political nerds. So for this is like Christmas for us. Just a few messages. Dave's message saying that the news mentions that Khan was heckled and booed, but fails to mention that this was by the Britain First candidate. And actually, Dave, you make a really good point, because I remember I was there at the count on the very first time Sadiq Khan got voted in, and the Britain First candidate actually booed, but also physically turned his back to Sadiq Khan as he went to make his speech. So Britain First has a very kind of dark part of all of this. Quite a few messages about Claire. I do love having Claire on. She said, is your guest Claire on speed? She's delusional. But Claire just has a very strong view. Claire thinks it's time to get rid of Rishi Sunak and bring in Suella Braverman. And Susie's messages, and that was quite sneaky, Aisha. You gave that Tory woman enough rope to hang the entire Tory party. And I speak hitherto as a mostly Conservative voter, although I did vote for Tony Blair, but I now feel a bit homeless. Suella Braverman, Jacob Rees-Mogg, really exclamation mark. That's from Susie. Well, I like having Claire on because it's good to have that kind of view. Right, okay, I'm going to go around my panel now and just get their initial thoughts of where they are so far. Anne, we'll start for you. What's your kind of overall assessment of where we are? What are your takeaways?
My takeaway is that Rishi Sunak sits a bit more firmly in a very shaky saddle than he sat before these exciting days. And I think it's so interesting when you get to that level, Aisha, of uncertainty about how a leader is going to hang on, that you end up with these people like Ben Houchen in the Tees Valley, who really holds the future of the Conservative Party and the leader in his hand. And I'm sure that will have some repercussions in the region. But I do think that Rishi Sunak has probably just about answered the question, why keep going with me? I would be quite surprised if we see that ouster that some people were talking about. Let's see, of course, if the West Midlands goes Tory way as well. I think he will really think he's home and dry. He would open a bottle of champagne if he were a drinker, which he isn't, because of course he's horribly self-disciplined. If it goes the other way, I think he'll say, well, we hear the message from the electorate, but on the whole, we still think we've got something to fight for, and now I'm going to take the fight to Labour.
Steve, what are your kind of assessments at this point?
I think the results confirm what we already knew, that there is an anti-Tory mood across the country. I mean, the gains Labour made in the south, north, winning the mayoralty in Sunak's own patch in North Yorkshire. And it is very interesting when this happens, because it doesn't happen very often in England. But when it does, it is deep. So it happened in the 1990s, when Britain fell out of the exchange rate mechanism in 1992. The Tories then were never ahead again, having just won a fourth election. And I think we're in that situation now, and that these results confirm it.
John.
I agree with something Keir Starmer said in the early hours of Friday morning, that the most important contest probably was the Blackpool South by-election.
Is that because you were there?
Partly. But also it was a parliamentary contest and a chance for the voters to really give a verdict on the Rishi Sunak's government, more than the two contests we've just been talking about, the mayoral elections in Tees Valley and West Midlands. And it was interesting because it showed Labour doing well, and also because it showed the Reform UK snapping at the heels of the Tories. My other thoughts are, I'm sure we'll discuss this, that have Labour been damaged by Sir Keir's stance on Gaza? Well, on Friday morning when he came to Blackpool, he was asked by my colleague Rob Powell about that, and Mr. Sir Keir admitted, yes, it had been a factor. And what I would say is, Gorgeous George hasn't yet unleashed his Red Army of candidates, which he's already announced in the last few days, are going to contest seats at the general election. Now, they published a list, the Workers' Party, Mr. Galloway's party, 150 candidates selected so far. And if you look at that list, they're nearly all in Labour seats. So there is a chance that George Galloway could damage the Labour Party in the way that Reform is damaging the Tories.
Well, let's just stay with that theme, because I mean, Steve Richards, I'm keen to get your views on this. And I just wrote a piece actually yesterday about this. I mean, I think Labour has had a great night, but well done, John. Good, you've done your homework. But I do think they should be concerned about the Gaza effect. And certainly, you know, when I spoke to Labour people at the beginning of all of this, Steve, there are some people who are just saying, oh, you know, it's not a big deal and it'll all kind of go away, and you know, it's nothing to get that kind of het up about. But actually, you know, the Muslim vote does matter. And also, it's not just the Muslim vote. There are other people that care about this. There's a generation of young people who are being kind of politicised by this conflict. What do you think Labour should do about this now, Steve?
Well, I think at least now they recognise the significance of the situation, and John highlighted how vivid that significance could become. And it's a really interesting example of how Labour leaders, especially, who have cause to feel more insecure on the whole, spend a lot of their time avoiding the traps of the recent past and then fall into a different trap. And so when all this happened after the nightmare of October the 7th, the attack on Israel, you know, Keir Starmer and his team, we must not be like Jeremy Corbyn, we will not be like Jeremy Corbyn, and so on, in their response. But in doing so, clearly, evidently alienated a significant section of the Muslim voters. And so the way through it is, A, to think beyond the immediate. You know, Tony Blair did the same. We must not be like the Labour in the 80s. I will back President Bush, boom, boom, boom. And then suddenly a whole series of other challenges come your way. I think it's difficult now to undo what has been done. I mean, they've got a perfectly sensible and nuanced policy now, actually. But I think the damage was done early on, and that will have some consequences. But on the whole, just more widely, I mean, you know, if you look back to Labour 2 or 3 years ago, these are a spectacular set of results. But you're right, Aisha, to raise, you know, the areas where there are big lessons to be learnt, I think.
And I mean, what can Keir Starmer and his team do now? We spoke earlier in the programme to Ali Milani, who leads he's the chair of the Labour Muslim Network, and he was saying that the next sort of, I suppose, policy test for Labour is going to be about selling arms to Israel. I mean, he conceded that, you know, the position the Labour Party had now on a ceasefire was in a better position. But for a lot of people, and it isn't just Muslims, I mean, I'm from a Muslim background myself, but there's a lot of other people who feel very strongly about this. I mean, How much pressure will Labour continue to be under on this issue? And is this perhaps a kind of harbinger of, if Labour does come to power, how difficult foreign policy is for Labour to navigate?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the key point for me. And as you know, I spent quite a lot of time in the US as well. And the Gaza question is coming for the Democrats at speed. There's great concern in the Biden camp and also among former leaders. The name drop of the week. I was actually talking to Bill Clinton about this.
Oh,
How about that? Sorry, it's going to bring it on.
Anne, get you.
There we go. Looking at the West Midlands one day and
From the West Midlands to the West Wing.
Oh.
Out of this panel, right? That sense that this is really a problem for centre-left parties in particular is on everybody's minds as it happened, including his. And I think that very much Joe Biden and probably Keir Starmer, but as someone said about who's done a big job in foreign policy for Labour before, that Keir Starmer tends to go at things like, I've done a speech on it, I've done that, I can now move on to something else. And the Gaza issue is just going to keep coming back and back for him. I do think, to answer your direct question though, Aisha, he cannot go down the road of saying he will stop arms sales to Israel. Remember that Israel came under attack by Iran, and Iran-backed proxies are tilting at and preparing to attack Israel all the time and have done so in recent weeks. It is out of the question, I think, for any moderate UK leader not to be part of that coalition that supplies arms, admittedly in a relatively small way, but symbolic is symbolic, and it matters a lot to voters.
Do you agree with that, Steve? Do you agree with that, Steve, that there's no way that Keir Starmer could ever countenance an arms embargo, even though previous Labour prime ministers have done so?
Yeah, no, I agree with Anne that is what will happen, but I actually think he has more space than that if he wanted to use it. And as you say, it's happened in the past. In fact, wasn't it Tony Blair at one point?
Yep.
Stopped arms sales to
I think
Israel.
Thatcher did as well.
He did.
Yeah, but they didn't have Iran quite on the march at the way that Iran is on the march now. That's the problem.
Yeah, but there are wider questions about the Middle East and Israel's response to Gaza, which makes it a perfectly legitimate position to take. But I don't think he will, because of this huge pressure on a Labour leader of the opposition to appear, first of all, tough on defence, pro-American, and all the other things of getting advice from Blair and others. So I don't think he will, but that he has the space to do it, I think, is a different point.
Okay, well, look, just a bit of West Midlands news. According to the BBC, senior Conservative and Labour sources now think that the West Midlands contest currently has just under 2,000 votes in it across the region, and that recount in Coventry continues. So it's all pretty nail-biting. Jon, what did we learn about the Conservatives and reform?
We learned that reform is a threat, particularly, I think, probably more so in parliamentary elections and in local elections. I mean, I think they've picked up one or two councillors, haven't they, but hardly any.
And haven't, I think.
Yes. I interviewed Richard Tice in Blackpool. In fact, I interviewed their candidate, Mark Butcher, twice as well. And Richard Tice, in his interview with me, and he said it in subsequent interviews, claiming that they're the real opposition to Labour now. And of course, he was also claiming, I think we could come second in this by-election. Well, it was pretty close. They almost did. There was only 100 or so votes in it. And I think reform is... I mean, I remember being in this studio, and I think Richard Tice was here as well a few months ago, and I was being very sceptical about the Reform UK's pledge to fight every seat. Now, he's still talking about that. Do you remember last time, of course, they didn't in the end, and I wonder if that might happen again.
But hasn't Lee Anderson said that they were not going to stand in some of his mates' seats?
That's right, Brendan Clark-Smith and one or two others.
Ben Bradley.
But they're clearly a threat to the Conservatives. They're clearly disaffected to Tories, mostly. Some disaffected Labour voters as well are going to them. So they face that threat, and they can potentially do a lot of damage. I mean, their polling now is, 12, 13. Some polls have got them at 15%. I think I'm right in saying they got 17% in Blackpool South. So that is a problem. And clearly, the fact is that the Tories are deeply unpopular. And that Rishi Sunak, I personally think Rishi Sunak's had a good few weeks, actually. He's been more punchy, more combative at Prime Minister's questions. His attack lines against Keir Starmer are better. And the Tories have actually started coming up with a few policies on defence issues and other things. And whatever you think about the whole Rwanda policy, the fact is that they've really hammered that hard in the run-up to the polling day on Thursday. I mean, the cynical view is that they delayed the passage of the Rwanda bill. Remember when everybody said, why are they taking their time? And when the Prime Minister back in November said it was emergency legislation. Well, the cynical view, and perhaps it's more than a cynical view, is that they wanted to time royal assent for just before these elections. Now, they will think that that plays well for them.
Although it hasn't proven to be that successful in these results.
No, and Rwanda still plenty of people who thinks Rwanda won't work. But the fact is the Tories have been campaigning much harder in recent weeks. And the Prime Minister, I think, to be fair to him, is in campaign mode. And he's everywhere. I mean, he's been all over the country doing all sorts of events. So has Keir Starmer. It must have been embarrassing for Keir Starmer to go to Harlow on Wednesday and then for them not to snatch that on Thursday. But Keir Starmer went to Blackpool twice. One of those, obviously, was to go to an USDOR conference, a friendly trade union to the Labour leadership.
Okay.
But, I agree with what Rishi Sunak wrote in the Daily Telegraph today. He said, there's still all to play for. I mean, these election results show that it's not a done deal. All these people who talk about a Labour landslide. No.
Oh, okay.
We did some other clever people who do all the counting, the sums at Sky News, have come up with a suggestion that we're in hung Parliament territory based on these results.
Although it didn't put in Scotland. The Sky analysis doesn't include Scotland, and also it remain. That is quite a narrow. It's quite hard to sort of see that as a direct correlation to.
And people vote differently in general elections from local elections.
So, John, let's test that. Is there everything still to play for the Tories after these results?
I think so.
Steve. Steve, what do you think about John's assertion that there's everything?
I really disagree with just about every element of John's assessment. So to take the first one, it's been a great few weeks for Rishi Sunak. You see what?
Better, I said. Better.
Don't change your tune now, John.
All the policies have been framed with that understandable paranoia about the impact of reform. What happens? Reform, you were there, John, almost got up to the Tory level of support in Blackpool. And it seems to me it's too late now. But the big strategic choice Sunak faced was whether to do what all these other Tory leaders have done, woo the Brexit Party, woo the Eurosceptics on the right, as Cameron did. And each time they do it, they fall. It doesn't work. And you've seen that with these results we've had, as you mentioned it, John, Rwanda being passed into legislation, some other kind of tough stuff aimed at those reform voters. What happens? Reform comes almost to the level of Tory support in that by-election. So I don't think it works. I don't think these results show that there's all to play for. There are questions, we've discussed one of them, about what Labour need to do. But that the Tory situation is dire, I think, has been confirmed by this. And Ben Houchen winning on his own ticket without wearing a Tory kind of rosette or anything, I'm afraid is not enough for them to cling to suggest that there is all to play for.
Okay, and what do you think? All to play for? Is it now? I mean, someone messaged me in early saying it's like a football game where one side is like 5-0 up and there's still like 20 minutes to go and everyone just wants the game to be over. But do you agree with John that there's still everything to play for?
I think there's still something to play for. I think the game, so to speak, is you could be 5-0 up, but you get a few goals back, and that looks better than going down 5-0. In as much as I understand these football things, I think there is. You're absolutely right to point out that Scotland isn't factored in here, and it does look with the Nats in Scotland in a fairly dreadful state that Labour will pick up very well in Scotland. But I do think there's one area where Labour probably didn't get that sweep down in councils that they were really hoping for through the Tees Valley, the Ben Houchens, the sort of signs that they want are in those bellwether seats in Darlington and all the way down there, and then through the West Midlands and into the south. So I think they would, in English terms, like a slightly more clinching result. And that's what people like Peter Mandelson keep warning them about. If you've got to win conclusively in England, and frankly, also to govern with a degree of stability. It's not great to be relying on Scotland. Well played as it is, Aisha.
Well, let's not slag off Scotland on my watch. But in terms of the Ben Houchen result, it wasn't the swing such though. I mean, Ben Houchen did win that. His vote came down, but according to the swing, does it not look like they are that Labour is in the position to actually do pretty well in the parliamentary elections around that area?
The Tories did take Labour did take Hartlepool Council, where they had that dreadful by-election defeat a few years back. I was talking to Richard Holden during the week. He reckons that if Labour are going to win a majority at the general election, they have to win all the parliamentary constituencies in that Tees Valley area. I think there's 5. I'm not sure, maybe more than that, I'm not sure. But, I mean, the fact that they were cheered up by the fact they took Hartlepool Council, that will encourage them to think
like, for example, I remember the scars on my back from places like Nuneaton and Redditch, and Milton Keynes is a really, really like kind of important kind of swing.
Richard Holden also said that Milton Keynes was a key battleground, and Labour did well there, didn't they?
So I mean, in some of those kind of key battleground seats, they have actually done quite well.
Yes. Yeah, they have. Yeah, I thought you were asking Anne. No, they have, yes, but they didn't win Harlow. They won Thurrock. That's a parliamentary seat
Thurrock,
they used to have.
Very Brexit. The other thing which I thought was interesting is how it feels like Brexit is no longer the metric on which people vote. You know, there's lots of Brexity areas that sort of went Labour.
Including, for example, very good example, Blackpool South. 68% voted Leave in that constituency. And you go out to places like Blackpool, of course, you hear a lot about how the Tories have not delivered on their pledge on levelling up. I think that is a complaint you hear in a lot of northern constituencies. I mean, there's plenty of examples. I mean, there was that daft day, wasn't there, when the levelling up money went to, was it North London and not the north of England?
Yes, that's famous. Nigel's just messaged and saying, what this country needs is a Labour-Lib Dem coalition. Well, we'll come on to the Lib Dems next. But look, Anne, this race is obviously incredibly close in the West Midlands. If Labour does manage to win, what does that do for Sunak? What does that do for the Tories?
I think it makes clear for Sunak that if he wants to take this fight, he believes that despite the 5-0 analogy that we had earlier, that if he wants to bring that down, he's going to have to change the way that he communicates. Some people have said that he spent far too much time in a way like a sort of CEO sitting there at the heart of the operation in Downing Street. There is a sense of people like Andy Street, who are good campaigners, seen as quite good managers, cannot do this alone. They cannot pull back these strategically vital parts of the electoral map. So I think it would be a sign that the long campaign is going to have to shift focus and simply saying Labour isn't being open about its spending plans, which is true, by the way, and Rwanda is, our calling card, and that's going to be enough. I think Rishi Sunak has relied too heavily on a limited number of topics, and I think that will be the takeaway.
John, what do you think? What will happen if Street loses? That's a big story.
Yes, I mean, of course, he, like Ben Houchen, he campaigned very much on his own personal record and less as he didn't say, look, I'm the Tory candidate. He said, I'm the chap who's run the West Midlands very well in recent years.
Very much brand Andy.
Brand Andy, yes. I mean, he, and of course, he criticised I remember being at the Conservative conference in Manchester when, I don't know if you remember, he did an impromptu news conference when he attacked the decision to cancel that bit of HS2. I always thought it was hilarious that the Tories cancelled HS2 or part of it in an old railway station where they were holding their conference.
I mean, it was beyond thick of it at this point, yes.
But I mean, it'll be hugely disappointing for the Tories, and they'll all be saying, if it's really, really close, which it looks like, what if? What could we have done better? And so on. I mean, I don't know whether lots of cabinet ministers went to support him. He may have said, stay away. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of the PM going to campaign for him in the West Midlands.
No, we spoke with somebody from the Birmingham Live, and she said no. The Jeremy Hunt had been up a couple of weeks ago, but didn't do any media apparently on his visit.
What was the point then?
Exactly. If media's there, it doesn't mean anything. Steve, if Labour wins this race, what does it mean for Labour?
Well, it will confirm they've had a good 48 hours, and this will be an unexpected bonus because I think they assumed they wouldn't win this, and it would be the same as Rishi Sunak rushing up to Birmingham to congratulate Andy Street and so on. But I think the significance is more with the Conservative Party because, for reasons that were partly irrational, there was this widespread assumption that if Andy Street won, along with Ben Houchen, things were pretty okay and Sunak would be all right and so on. Now, if that doesn't happen in this case, however close, I think it will kind of unleash a further sense of feverishness. It will have an impact on morale in number 10, which kind of feeds on itself when things are going badly. A kind of say, oh, what do we do now? What we've tried everything and so on. So I think it will be of some significance in the Tory post-mortem to come if they don't hold on to this. I was speaking to a senior minister the other day from that region, and he's a very pro-Sunak figure, and he said, well, watch the West Midlands. Implying he thought they were going to keep this, and if they don't, I think it would be of greater significance for Tory morale than Labour morale, which is already pretty good.
I'm trying to think who the pro-Sunak ministers are in the West Midlands. Let me guess, Andrew Mitchell.
He's not going to reveal his sources,
they
Jon
were
Craig.
saying, keep an eye out.
You can't compete with Anne and Bill Clinton.
I'm never going to get over that one.
I was going to say, Joe Biden phoned me for advice.
But Anne, that reminds me of this.
Did.
Oh, he actually did, Steve.
No, he didn't.
Oh, damn. Well, he's probably listening to the
I've got
podcast.
Biden on the line now. I've told him to hold on.
But Anne, that reminds me of the story that so many, how there are certain Labour women, I count myself part of this, we're slightly uptight feminists a lot of the time, and we're happy to be uptight feminists. That's what the critique is. But then Bill Clinton came to the Labour Party conference, and you have never seen a bigger stampede for all the women going in, putting their lipstick on, like getting all like dolled up for Bill Clinton. It was a moment where, uptight feminism in the Labour Party sort of was challenged quite heavily by the majestic presence of Bill Clinton. Now, speaking of majestic presence, we've not talked about Ed Davey and the Liberal Democrats. John, what about the Liberal Democrats? They actually had quite a good night.
Yes, but they didn't. Not spectacular, was it? And it also, we had expected perhaps Lib Dems to do well in the south, but one of the eye-catching local government results was Rushmore, which I must admit I hadn't heard of until about 2 days ago.
Mount Rushmore, you probably thought.
I think it's the part of, is it Hampshire, that includes the Aldershot Army Barracks.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And Labour took that, didn't they? Not the Liberal Democrats. I think I'm correct about that. So perhaps...
But they did take Tunbridge Wells.
Yeah, that's a good result for them, isn't it? Disgusted of Tunbridge Wells. So the Tories in Tunbridge Wells will be disgusted, won't they? But I've always thought that the Lib Dems will damage the Tories in the south, in the shires. And your caller who is talking about a Lib Lab coalition, well, might be some sort of arrangement after the election.
Do you honestly think that Labour's not going to get majority, John?
I'm not... well... It looks like it, but never underestimate Labour's ability to make a mess of things like they did in 1992.
That's very true.
I just, on the maths of it, why I don't think there'll be a Labour landslide. For a start, in 1997, of course, John Major's majority had virtually disappeared between 92 and 97. He started with a majority of 21 in 1992. Boris Johnson won a majority of 80. Now, MPs will tell you that with boundary changes, the Tory majority is really 90. And I'm going to agree with Keir Starmer about something else. I do think they've got a mountain to climb.
Yeah, they do.
Because they've, if the Tories really have got a majority of 90, then that's a much bigger task for Labour than 97.
And remember, if Keir Starmer gets the same swing that Tony Blair did in 1997, he only gets a working majority of just one. So that just puts into context. Steve, I mean, the Liberal Democrats are being quite interesting, actually, because a lot of people have said they've been quite kind of under the radar recently, and perhaps the post office scandal and Ed Davies' connection with that has been part of it. But they seem to be sort of just plugging away quietly in some of these seats. And the reality is Labour kind of needs the Liberal Democrats to do quite well in those blue wall seats.
Yeah, it's a really interesting strategy, perhaps one they have no choice over, which is to just quietly, as you say, campaign away in their target seats and not get neurotic about national coverage, of which they've had very little. I mean, in the build-up to 1997, Paddy Ashdown, their leader then, was very smart in acquiring relevance and significance, which could have been wholly lost with the rise of Blair and New Labour. Blair was keen on it too, that friendship with Blair and the talk of the two of them going into government together, electoral reform, none of it happened. But in the build-up, the Lib Dems got a lot of points because Ashdown was seen as so close to Blair and Blair keen on forming an alliance with them. None of that's in play at the moment, beyond this informal, as you suggest, partnership between Labour and the Lib Dems. And you're right, they want the Lib Dems to do well in that so-called blue wall. And that appears to be where they are targeting, and in the southwest as well. And they're just quietly getting on with it. It's weird. You know, they usually have exuberant leaders like Jeremy Thorpe and, you know, say Ashdown had a lot of publicity in the build-up to 97. Ed Davey won't get much beyond the broadcasting rules that he'll get some then. But I'm told they're doing quite well.
Steve, I've just remembered one very good result for the Lib Dems this week was Cheltenham, where I think I'm right in saying the Tories don't have any councillors there now, and Alex Chalk will be dusting off his barrister's wig and gown, because I think he'll be going back to the bar after the general election.
I think Alex Chalk's very good, actually.
And I don't mean going to the pub like the Tory plotters are now.
Anne, I suppose the other point about the Liberal Democrats is also there's probably a little green element here as well. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the Greens had quite a good night, probably being the beneficiaries from the trouble that Labour has had over Gaza. I mean, do you think there's any word you can see the Greens picking up any more seats? I mean, they're about to lose Caroline Lucas, who, you know, she's won, but she's a big voice and she's a big figure. Do you think they could take? I mean, Thangham Debonair's seat is potentially vulnerable to Greens in Bristol.
I mean, they had a very good result in Bristol and elsewhere. The question is, do they take more away from the Lib Dems, notwithstanding, you know, the perhaps understellar power of Ed Davey? I take the point that my fellow panelists are making, that Lib Dems are just getting on with it, doing what they do best, which is on the ground, local campaigning, and letting everyone else have the firefight in the air wars. But I do think there's a definite part of the vote which is somewhere between the left of the Labour Party, particularly on environmental issues, obviously, the Greens and the Lib Dems, and that tends to ally a bit with that broader world outlook, geopolitics and Gaza, although they're not apparently connected, where I think some votes are going to go into that funnel. And the question is, can Labour get them back saying, well, we're really the only game in town if you want to wield power from the centre left? Or will there be people who say, I want to give you, okay, you know, that's fine by me, but I don't want Labour to completely control that field of play. And I think that will be a really interesting little group. In the election, I can't predict how that will go. My sense is it probably feels more like the Lib Dems are the better campaigners when push comes to shove, but a lot of younger voters probably prefer the Green brand.
Yeah. But we are just going to turn our attention to really what is that mayoral contest in the West Midlands, which is really on a knife edge. And I'm delighted to be joined by Steve McCabe, who is a Labour MP for Birmingham Selly-Oak, and he's also the Shadow Minister for Defence, of course, and that's all in the West Midlands. Steve, welcome. What intel do you have?
Well, I think there's two more of the local authorities to submit their results. So I think Coventry, where there's been a recount, and Sandwell, and it's on a complete knife edge at the moment. It looks as if Labour might just be ahead, but it is literally too close to call.
And look, what have been the issues at play here, Steve? We've heard a lot about the situation in Gaza. How much do you think that's played into this election?
Well, I mean, I think it's had some impact. There has been an element of protest vote, largely from Muslim voters, either in voting for the independent or in staying at home. It's kind of understandable. People are very distressed about Gaza, and obviously, you know, it's an immensely difficult issue for everyone. But I think on balance, it's the election itself has really been about, you know, who is best suited to be the mayor of the West Midlands, a Tory who's working hand in glove with a failed prime minister, or a new guy who's going to represent the fresh change that Labour hopes to usher in.
Is it fair to say that Andy Street's really that close to Rishi Sunak when he's distanced himself from Rishi Sunak? And as Jon Craig was reminding us, you know, he did that sort of press conference at the Tory party conference, being very critical about the cancellation of HS2. He's not quite hand in glove with Rishi Sunak.
Well, the reality is Andy did do that. That's absolutely true. And then 48 hours later, he announced he had done a deal after a cup of tea with the Prime Minister. And of course, he has had, I think it's £2.5 million from the Tory party over the course of the last couple of years. So, you know, it's true he drops his branding when he thinks the election won't work for him. But I think anyone who's been a member of the Tory party for over 40 years is a Tory.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But listen, Steve, I just want to come back to the Gaza thing. There was a Labour briefing, an alleged Labour briefing, which went out to one of the regional reporters about the Gaza situation, saying it's the Middle East, not the West Midlands, that will have won Street the mayoralty. Once again, Hamas are the real villains. Now, a lot of people are very upset by those comments. We had Ali Milani from the Labour Muslim Network on, who said that was a pretty despicable racist comment. What do you think about that briefing and those words?
Well, I thought it was offensive, dangerous, and stupid. And I think if the person who said it had been identified, they probably have faced action from the party. As I say, Gaza is a very difficult issue. I think we all recognise that. We all want to try and support the talks that are going on and hope that the ceasefire will emerge and we can make progress. But I mean, to equate what's a democratic mayoral election in the West Midlands with something to do with Hamas is just nonsense.
And look, if Richard Parker wins, of course, the champagne corks will be popping with Labour. But the reality is, for a lot of citizens across Birmingham, they're in a terrible situation because the council is in an absolute mess. It's having to cut loads of services. How, if there is a Labour mayor, what are they going to do to deliver for local people in Birmingham? And if Labour does win the next general election, should Labour pump some more money and help Birmingham City Council?
Well, I think Richard has made clear that his key interests are transport, helping connect people to where the jobs are, skills development so that we've got people ready for the new jobs that are coming along, and house building so that we can actually do something with the terrible homeless issue. All good news for the West Midlands. In terms of the council, well, I mean, I think Labour wouldn't be seeking to exploit it for political ends, unlike the present government. They were only too quick to get the commissioners into Birmingham. I don't think we'll see them going into the other 68 or 70 local authorities that are lined up to go bust. And we certainly won't be getting press releases on the day of an election saying we're going to have a senior police officer hold an inquiry. the problems in Birmingham should be looked at. The people who have made mistakes and have been negligent in their behaviour, whether they be councillors or senior officers, need to put their hands up. But we need to recognise that any enterprise that has £1 billion stripped out of its spending capacity is going to be in some difficulty.
Okay, and finally, Steve, who's going to win? Go on, what's your prediction? What are your waters telling you?
I might just be popping one of those champagne corks.
Oh,
Very close, but I'm feeling a little bit optimistic, and I'm not noted for my super optimism, so I think.
They don't call you Steve Jazz Hands McCabe, Steve, because you're quite a dour Scotsman, even though you're in the.
That's a bit harsh.
Well, they maybe do.
I've always found Steve a very cheerful fellow.
I can't believe the Baroness has just called me a dour Scotsman.
Well, look, Steve, great to have you on. Thanks very much for your time. That's Steve McCabe there. So interesting, John. It's sort of, Steve's a well-connected man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember being at the by-election in Birmingham, Erdington, when he was the MP running that after Jack Dromey died. And I remember he had a very lively debate with Gary Sambrook, who's MP for, let me remember which seat it is. Northfields, I think, isn't it? And but yes, Steve's very plugged into what's happening in the West Midlands, and if he says Labour are going to win, I think we should take that seriously.
Yeah, very seriously. Now, listen, answer Helen's question. Helen wanted to know, because we talked a lot about London and we talked a lot about the West Midlands. She wants to know about that York and North Yorkshire, because that was a very big win.
Yes,
I mean,
North Yorkshire is a big county in terms of acres, but a lot of the population is in the York area. And so I talked to Tory MPs during the week, and I wouldn't say they'd written it off, but they were pessimistic about their chances of holding it. Everybody says, oh, it's Rishi Sunak's patch, Yorkshire Dales and all that. But there's probably more sheep than there are voters in the Yorkshire Dales. And a lot of the voters are in York and areas where there are other Labour support, Labour councils and Labour constituencies.
Yeah, so that's sort of that. So Helen, I hope that answers your question. You did put at the end of your thing, did the more populated city of York swing it?
Yeah, I'd say yes.
So it's probably yes to that. So look, Anne and John and Steve, we're just sort of coming to the end of our show. Final thoughts on what do you think's gonna what do you think we're gonna get next? I don't think we're going to get the West Midlands result in the next few minutes, sadly. I think there's going to be about another hour or so. But Anne, what's your kind of final thoughts on where things are?
I think they end up in a place where Rishi Sunak remains in his job, but that the lack of enthusiasm for the plan is working, we are on the steady road to a Conservative revival, cannot be ignored. And I think what you can see from all of our conversations is how much the party has lost foot soldiers. People always talk about what does this local election mean in terms of being predictive, and often it isn't entirely predictive at all. But what does matter is in those areas, you mentioned Cheltenham there with Alex Chalk, very talented minister there in the cabinet. Out, and the chances then for those MPs of staying in position are very slight. And I think the Tory targeting is they have to take some risks, and they're going to have to really decide where they want to go to try and pull back. They're not going to have the foot soldiers on the ground to fight everywhere. And I think that's going to be a really interesting, probably huge internal row around Isaac Levido and his potential strategy for Tories.
And that's such an important point. I mean, I alluded to that at the beginning. People forget that local councillors, not only are they front line of sort of politics on local level, they really are the foot soldiers when it comes to the general election. They're the ones that go out on a weekday night doing the door knocking and delivering the leaflets. And if they are very demoralised, and there's just not very many of them, you've got a kind of infrastructure problem there. Steve, your kind of final thoughts.
Yeah, I said earlier, it's been a terrible few days for the Conservatives and a good one for Labour. I would, if I were Keir Starmer, I would reflect a bit on something. John mentioned this Rawlings Thrasher model. I don't think you can really extrapolate parliamentary majorities from this, but his argument was, Rallings, who I saw on a channel, that although the Tory voters dropped, it's gone to smaller parties, people staying at home, some independents. And one of the many reasons it's not 1997 and why you can't just copy the New Labour strategy of 97 is this proliferation of Greens. John mentioned the Galloway Party, others. And therefore it needs a really sophisticated approach, I think, in the coming months from Labour as they approach and follow up what has been a successful May local election by-election couple of days.